we are all today or this afternoon, wherever you are in this big wide world. I'm sure it's not it's not night in Ohio. It's probably like 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. And I think that's probably Louis joined. No, it's not. It's Sarah Lloyd Wender. Marvelous. Well, that's a treat. So in case you're away from the desk when anyone turns up, Waleed, can you make Sarah co-host while I drive away? That's you don't have to do anything, Sarah. But just if people appear and Waleed is serving mint tea around the place and not at his desk. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Eimear, and that I'm going to get on the road, and I'll see you in about 20 minutes back here. I'll leave it in that we've got a wonderful company in very capable hands with I'm sure Ireland will deal with everything. It usually does. So hello and goodbye. And Eimear, over to you for a story.
Thank you, John, and thanks for inviting me. Hi, everybody. Greetings to you from Ireland at Kilkenny on a damp evening, as it is at this time of year. So I will start my story about the goddess Anya. I like to tell Irish stories, Irish folk tales, stories from the Irish mythology. So Anya, a beautiful goddess associated with the sun and the moon. She is the queen of the She, the Ace She, what we would call in other places the fairy people, the good people, the shining people. And she has her home, or one of her homes, in Lough Gur, which is a lake in County Limerick. And that is an enchanted lake. And I'm going to tell you two stories this evening about Lough Gur. The first one about Anya. So deep at the bottom of the lake, Anya has her castle. And she likes to come out because she is the goddess of the sun. On sunny days, she likes to come up, rise up from the lake and move over and sit on a special loch. A loch is an old Irish word meaning stone. It's called Siacán Banachi, the seat of the woman of the house. Now, Anya has beautiful long golden hair. And on sunny days, she likes to rise up, sit on her loch and comb her hair. Now, she has this beautiful golden comb, a magical comb. And on one sunny day in summer, Anya rose out from the lake and sat on her seat and began to comb her hair. And nearby on the hill called Knockadoon was a herd boy. He was looking after his cattle and his sheep. And he was fascinated as he watched the goddess Anya combing her hair. It wasn't her beautiful golden hair that he was fascinated with, not her blue eyes or her beautiful rosy cheeks. No, he was fascinated by her golden comb. In fact, he was mesmerized by it. Anyway, Anya continued combing her hair, and when she finished, she was quite tired, and she put it down on the loch beside her and she lay down to fall asleep. For a little snooze, but she fell into a very deep sleep. And the herd boy, noticing this, grabbed the chance. He came down from Knockadoon and he crept over as silently as he could, over to where Anya was sleeping. And quickly, he snatched the golden comb and ran home as fast as he could. He lived in a little cottage with his parents. And he went upstairs to his little room, and underneath the bed was a box. He took out the box and he put the comb inside, putting it back, not saying anything to his parents. And he came down for his tea, and he sat with his parents talking about this and that and everything except the fact that he'd seen the goddess Anya combing her hair, or that he'd taken her comb. But as they're eating, he's thinking all the time about this comb, and he can't wait for the meal to end so he can go back up. And he does. He pulls out the box from under the bed and he opens up the box and he takes out the comb and he is looking at this beautiful comb, mesmerized, fascinated by it. Puts it back in. But as the days go by, he becomes more and more and more obsessed with this comb. He begins to neglect the cattle. He begins to neglect the sheep. He stops farming. He stops helping his parents. All he can do is think about this golden comb. And instead of keeping it under his bed at night, he has it under his pillow. And it's the last thing he looks at before he goes to bed. And it's the first thing he looks at when he gets up. He is obsessed with this. He can think of nothing else. He stops eating. He stops washing. He doesn't get out of bed. He loses interest in absolutely everything except this golden comb. And because he's lying in bed all day and because he's not eating, he becomes very, very weak. And it occurs to him that he's dying. Because all he can live for is this. And he's getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And his parents are so worried, but they don't know what it is that ails him. And one day he calls his parents to his bedside and he said, "Mother and Father, I'm dying." And they're, "Oh, no, no." And he said, "Look, I've done a terrible thing. I have a confession to make. I stole the comb of the goddess Anya." And they said, "What? You stole the comb of the queen of the Ace She? How could you have been so foolish?" He said, "I couldn't help myself. I was fascinated with the comb. And I had to have it. And now I realize it's become an obsession and it's killing me. And I know if this isn't returned to her, my soul, when I pass over, will know no rest. So please take this comb and return it to the lake. Return it to she, to whom it belongs. Maybe then, when I die, that my soul will rest in peace." Oh, the parents were brokenhearted. And they took the comb and they headed off to Lochgar as fast as they could. And it was a very calm evening. The lake was like glass. And they picked up the comb and they threw it into the middle of the lake. And they ran behind a hawthorn tree, a fairy tree, a sciac, to see what might happen. All was still. And then suddenly there's a ripple and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And who emerges up from the lake holding the golden comb in her hand, but the goddess Anya? And she looks around. Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? And then she spots the man and woman behind the tree and nods to them in thanks. And then she goes back down, down, down into the lake. The lake was still once more. And the father and the mother, they run back as fast as they can to their son. He's there lying in the bed, getting weaker and weaker, and his mother is holding his right hand and his father is holding the left hand. And he's saying, "I am so sorry I've brought this trouble on you. You've been very, very good parents to me." And they said, "You were such a good son." And they cried, knowing that, well, it was their son's time to pass. And he closes his eyes. And they're waiting, expecting him to breathe his last. And suddenly he opens one eye. And he said, "Oh, I'd love some porridge. I am starving." And the mother jumps up. She's so happy. She runs down as quickly as she can, makes some porridge. It comes up. And he said, "I'd love some tea." And they give him tea. And after that, he began to get stronger and stronger. And soon he was able to get out of bed. And then he was able to go into the garden and do some work there. And then eventually he was able to tend his cattle and his sheep. He was very fortunate. Normally, Anya, if she's angered, will punish the person who's wronged her. He got a second chance. And he learned his lesson. It was not for him to covet something that wasn't his. It is not for any of us to have what it is not meant for us. He was very careful. He had learned his lesson. to watch those things that he can be obsessed with. And he started to work again, and he lived a very good life. He got married, he had children. He was always very, very careful, particularly on sunny days, to stay away from Lochgar. But if he was there, he would always watch in case there might be a telltale ripple that might indicate that Anya is emerging, lest he ever be tempted again. Sinead. So I have another story about Lochgar. Like I said, it's an enchanted lake. And they say that in the middle of the lake, there's a sciach, what we call a hawthorn tree. And on top of that hawthorn tree is a green cloak. And underneath that cloak is a Shivan, a Shanvan, a fairy woman, an old woman. And tá sí ag cnitáil ornaí agus bruchta dríochta don saoil seo agus an saoil eile. What she's doing is knitting magical prayers and spells for this world and the other world. And they say that every 7 years, the level of the lake drops so that you can see that sciach, that tree with the green cloak on the top, and you can see the Shivan and the Shanvan knitting the magical prayers and spells for this world and the other world. And on one sunny day, there was a horseman riding along the shores of Lochgar, and suddenly the level of the water dropped. And there before him was the sciach, that fairy tree with the green cloak over it, and the Shivan, the Shanvan knitting the magical prayers and spells for this world and the other world. This man was an arrogant man. He knew of this enchantment, and he decided to break it. So he headed over towards the tree on his horse, and ignoring the Shivan, the Shanvan, which is often the case with women who knit, unfortunately. And he reaches out his hand, grabs the green cloak, and with that, the Shivan yells at him, "Quit, a Vienna Wallev! Marky o here on Ban Marav, o Odach on Brat Wenham, them washes. Shame, shame, my silent tide. From the dead woman's land, a horseman comes, and from my crown, the green cloak snatching." And he ignored her again. And he headed off towards the bank of the lake. And just as he reached the edge, the tide rose up again, pulling him back into the lake. And as she grew, a fairy wind snatched the cloak from his hand. And by by magical forces, it was taken right up into the air and carried across over to the middle of the lake, where it came down, 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 down through the water to rest once more on top of that sciach, that fairy tree. Where it's there to this day. And the Shivan, the Shanvan is still there, sitting beneath the tree, knitting the magical prayers and spells for this world and the other world. And you may ask, what about the horseman? Well, he's still there to this very day. Every 7 years he's waiting for the level of the lake to drop so that he can come out once more. And each time the level drops, he gets on his horse and he begins to walk towards the edge of the lake. And just as he reaches it, the level of the water rises up again, pulling him back. And so that horseman, for his arrogance, is condemned to spend eternity waiting, attempting to get out. And like Sisyphus, who rolled that stone up the mountain, and when he could get almost to the top, he would roll back down again. He's condemned to spend eternity like Sisyphus and failing. And that is a lesson to all of us. to honor and respect the enchantments and not to interfere with those from the other world. Shine. And so this is a story, another story. It's my version of it. I think it may be Native American, about how the animals found fire. So Iwad is Iwad, sa Chanamshire, sa Cheershot, long, long ago in Ireland. Way, way, way back in time. It was after the snow and the ice had melted on the land. And the trees had just begun to grow. The birch trees were the first to come. And the grass was beginning to come. And the island of Ireland was beginning to be green once more. Well, the animals, they were still cold. Even though it had become green, it was still very, very cold. And they had no way of keeping warm. They had heard that the Fwiki, the wasps, who lived in a cave high up in Carranthool, which is the highest mountain in Ireland, that they had discovered fire and that they could be warm. Well, the Fwiki, how they discovered it is that they found a hole in the ground and they went down into them. They noticed it was warm and it took them down to the center of the earth, to that fire in the center of the earth. And they began to pick up little sparks on their tiny feet, came up. And in their cave, they were able to add sticks to it and create fire. Oh, the Fwiki, they had a great time. They were warm. They would fly around the fire in their cave, rubbing themselves gleefully, looking at the orange, red, and golden flames of the fire. And they were so full of themselves and so arrogant and said, we are never sharing this with anyone. This is our secret. But as the way with secrets and in the animal world, the animals knew, but there was no way. They knew the Fwiki would never share with them. So Giria, the hare, now she was a very, very wise hare. And she said, we need to stay warm somehow. So she called a council of the animals. And Shinnock the fox came, and Uller the eagle came, and Turk the boar came, and Dav the stag came, and the Bradon, the salmon, they all came, and they sat around, and they began to talk. And most of the animals said, there's no way we can get this fire. We're going to freeze to death. This is hopeless. There is no way we're going to ever find fire or get it from the Fwiki. And there's no way we can persuade them to share it. And Giria, being a very, very wise hare, said, well, we can cooperate. We can work together. And maybe we can devise a plan that we can get some fire. So they sat around and they discussed this and that and the other. And she said, the wise Giria, the wise hare, said, I'm the lightest and I'm the smallest. Let me go. And Shinnock the fox said, well, you can't go alone. Let me carry you. At least carry you as far as I can so that you can save your energy. And that is what she did. And she hopped up on Shinnock's back and he took her as far as the forest. And then, who was there to meet? Only Turk the boar. He said, Giria, hop up on my back and I can take you through the dense forest. So she thanked Shinnock and hopped up on Turk's back. Now it was a very dense forest, lots of brambles and briars and bracken. And Turk, being strong and full of stamina, well able to do that, took Giria through the forest. And when he'd come through the forest, who was waiting? Only Dav, the stag. And he said, hop up on my back, Giria, and I shall take you up the mountain. So she thanked Turk and hopped up on the back of Dav. And they went this way and that way, up, 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 a very, very steep path. But Dav was very strong, lots of strong muscles. And up they went until they came to a river. And from that river into that river flowed a waterfall. And out of the river leaped Bradon the salmon and said, Girya, hop up onto my back. So she thanked Dav and hopped up onto Girya's back. And such is the way with animals, and particularly the salmon. She began to leap up that waterfall, making that impossible journey that none of us can understand how salmon can do that. But she could do it. And Girya on her back and took her up to the top of the waterfall. And there was Uller, the eagle, waiting, and said, Girya, I'll take you the rest of the way. So Girya thanked Bradon and hopped up onto Uller's back. Oh, it was nice and warm, nestling in her warm feathers because it was really cold high up on the mountain. And Uller soared high up, and she had such sharp vision, and she could see the point on Carrantuil, at that highest mountain in Ireland, where the cave was, and could see the telltale wisps of smoke coming out of the mouth of the cave. And she flew over, and then gradually, quietly came down, and they landed away a short distance from the cave. Uller said, while you're going, Girya, I will distract the Fuiki. I will make such a racket. I will shriek and yell, and I flap my wings. That is what Uller did. Flapping her wings and shrieking that sharp, shrill call that eagles make. And with that, the Fuiki, the wasps, what is making that racket? And they all flew out, and they're looking bzzz, as Uller is flapping her wings and shrieking away. And Girya, well, she's very clever and very fast. She sneaks behind all that and into the cave. And what does she see in the center of the cave? Only the most beautiful fire with rich red, gold, yellow, orange flames. And she was there. Oh my goodness, look how warm it is. And she was mesmerized, and she walked all around the fire, rubbing her hands, and almost became hypnotized when she realized, oh, I'm here on a mission. So she put her paw in and took out a coal, put it in her mouth, and out she went from that cave as quickly as she could, and began to go zigzag, zigzag down the mountain. But the Fuiki were very clever. They sensed something was wrong, and they went back in, and they discovered that one coal from their fire was missing. Well, they came out, and they chased Girya down that mountain. And they chased, and just as they were about to sting her, she tripped and fell. The coal fell out of her mouth, and it began rolling down the mountain. But then Shimma came along. He picked it up in his mouth, and he began running, with the Fuiki following him down the mountain. And he ran as fast as he could. And then he arrived at the feet of Dav, who picked it up in his mouth. And he dropped the coal, and Dav picked it up and put it in his mouth, and he went bounding down the mountain as fast as he could with the Fuiki. They were getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and they were just about to sting him when he reached the edge of the forest, and he spat the coal out, and Turk was there to pick it up. And he picked it in his mouth, put it in his mouth, and ran through that dense forest. And then came through the forest, and he was exhausted at this point, and he began to run towards the river. And just as he did, he fell over, and it rolled out of his mouth and into the river. But not for long, because Bradon came along, grabbed it in her mouth, and began swimming down the river. And the Fuiki, raging, all they could do was fly above and see Bradon as she swam with the coal in her mouth. And they followed over the water. And eventually Bradon took a big leap into the air and spat out the coal. Uller picked it up in her claws and flew as high as she could, too high for the Fuiki to get it. But the Fuiki, they knew Uller couldn't stay up there forever. And if nothing else, they were patient. And they waited and waited and waited until Uller would have to come down. But Uller had spotted some trees some birch trees. And she flew above the birch trees and she began to descend. And the Fwickie, well, they were waiting. Now is our chance. But what did she do, Uller? She opened her claws and dropped the coal right down into the middle of the branches of a birch tree. And the coal went right down, 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 deep into the tree. Gone. Well, the Fwickie were incensed. There was no way they were going to get their coal now. And they had to content themselves that they had plenty of fire anyway. But such is the way when people have so much of something, they're not so willing to share it. Well, they bzzz their way back up to their cave in Carrantuil. But the poor animals, upset and devastated. We still have no fire. After all our efforts, we tried so hard. We cooperated, and yet we have no fire. But Girya, the wise hare, said, "Oh, all is not lost. The fire is in the birch tree. She contains the fire within her. Why don't we ask her for help?" So the animals went over to the birch tree and said, "Birch, can you help us? We know you contain the fire within you." "Indeed I do," she said. "It's right in my very being. All you have to do is take some of my bark, take it carefully, and gather some dry moss and dry grass. And with the firestone, you strike it and you can make a little spark. Because in me, within my bark, contains that spark. A spark of new beginning, a spark of life, a spark of warmth, a spark of fire." And they thanked the birch tree and off they went. They took some of her bark and they gathered some dry moss, dry grass, and they found some flint nearby and they struck the flint, and which created a spark, hit the birch bark, the dried moss, and then they had a little bit of fire and they added some small twigs. And that is how they discovered fire. And they were never, ever cold after that. And when the first people came to Ireland, it was from the animals that they discovered fire. And they learned how to stay warm with the fire, how to cook their food from the fire. And they would spend many evenings sitting around the fire, listening to stories like this one. Sinead. Would any of the tellers like to tell a story? Jespina? That doesn't look like a no to me. Or Terry, sorry. What about you, Despina?
I can if you want, but I don't know if my microphone is working all right. I was told it has a little buzz. It does.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, in that case, a family-friendly story, right?
A family-friendly story.
Okay, let's see. I read a story in one of Liz's books that reminded me of a different version of it turned into a Greek myth I had read a while back. So, one day, a long, long time ago, in ancient Greece, when the weather was much colder than this, a woodcutter began walking into the woods to cut down trees. So he found this perfect tree, perfect trunk in front of him, which was right next to a river, right at the bank, just straight up. It was very, very fit to be cut easily, and it would provide the woodcutter with good wood for his fire, which now we know how they got it. So he picked up his axe and he was ready to give a blow when all of a sudden it slipped from his hands and fell into the river. And the waters were deep and the river was fast flowing. There was no way for this man to enter the water without putting his life in danger. He got some sticks and he tried to fish it out, but all he got was pebbles. So he just stood there at the bank of the river, crying, sobbing very sadly, when all of a sudden this apparition appeared in front of him, and it had a heart with wings. And it seemed to be hovering above the water because the woodcutter could see that on that creature's feet, sandals with feathers grew, as if they were growing out of his feet. The woodcutter knew who that man was in front of him. It looked like a man, but he had this kind of glow of him all around him. And the woodcutter was in awe because he knew that in front of him, the god Hermes had appeared. Now, Hermes addressed the woodcutter. "Why are you crying, man?" he said. And the woodcutter told the god
Sorry,
his troubles.
Jessica. Are there children in your room?
There are children right outside, but I think I can do something about it. Give me a second.
Sorry about that.
Παιδιά, όποιος φωνάζει ησυχία όλοι. Όλη ησυχία. Βιάννα, φύγετε από εδώ. Νικολέτα, πάρ' τους και φύγετε από εδώ, έχω δουλειά.
Having more fun than listening to stories.
Sorry for that. I tried my teacher's voice. I hope it works.
Apologies for the interruption. It was hard to hear, but they were really loud, so it was hard to hear you.
They still are. Okay, anyway. So, in a much quieter place, the great god Hermes had addressed the woodcutter and had found out what his troubles were. The woodcutter told him that he was really poor and that axe he had lost that day was his only one, so he had no way of finding where his axe was, and he would have no way of providing for himself or his family that day or the days to come. So it seemed that touched the nerve in the god, because the god said, "Do not worry, please stop crying, I am here to help you." And in front of the woodcutter's amazed eyes, the god simply put his hand in the river and the water, and out came a golden axe. "Now, this must be your axe," he said to the woodcutter. The woodcutter said, "Thank you, but I already told you that I am poor. I could never afford to have such an axe. This axe is not mine." "Okay, then, let me try again," said Hermes. And again the divine hand was dipped inside the waters, and out came a silver axe. "Then this axe must be yours," said Hermes. "Dear God, I'm afraid that this axe is not my own. I already explained. I'm just a poor woodcutter. I could never afford to have a gold or a silver axe. My axe is very simple. It is very plain. It is just a piece of wood, a stick, with an iron part in it. That's all. That is my axe. This axe is not mine." "In that case, let me try again," said Hermes. And he put his divine hand inside the fast-flowing river, and out came a very plain axe. "Is this your axe?" he asked the woodcutter. "Yes, thank you, great god Hermes. This is my axe indeed. Thank you for your help." And the god laid the axe beside the man, And the man took him and very gratefully thanked the god deeply, sincerely, from the bottom of his heart. And then he kept on cutting that trunk. The god was gone, and the man lay there with his axe and the trunk. And as the trunk was cut, and he took it and put it on his back, and he was ready to make his way back home, next to the cut trunk he saw the golden axe and the silver axe that the great god Hermes had left by his side to reward the poor woodcutter's honesty. So the man took the trunk, took his axe, took the golden axe and the silver axe, and the next day he was in the market where he sold them and made sure he would forevermore provide for his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. That was lovely. Absolutely lovely. This is a story. Generally, I tell Irish stories, but this is one I heard last week, actually up in Liz's. It was told by Breezy Kelly, who makes bread for peace, and a great bread maker, but also a great storyteller. Now, this comes from the Indabella. It's an Indabella tale from Zimbabwe. But I thought, given the state of the world at the moment, with the wars, etc., and hatred, that this is a very, I think, important story. It's called A Blind Man Catches a Bird. So a young man got married to a woman, and he was madly in love with her. And her brother was blind, and he was eager to get to know his brother-in-law. So he asked him one day if he would go hunting with him. And the brother-in-law said, "But I cannot see, but if you help me to see, then we can go into the forest together." So the young man led his brother-in-law by the hand, and off they went into the forest. And first they followed the path that was familiar to the blind man. And it was easy for him just to walk without tripping and being confident. And after a while, they went deeper into the forest, where the trees became more close together, and there was many, many places for the animals to hide. And the blind man held on tight to his brother-in-law. But then he told him about all the things that he could hear, that he was aware of, that his sighted brother couldn't see. He would say, "Oh, I hear a fox over there. She's tending to her cubs. Oh, and there's a bird. It's just about to fly off. I can hear it unfolding its wings." And the sighted man was amazed and fascinated at all his brother-in-law was aware of in the forest, and he who couldn't see. And of course, the sighted man never noticed these things. He was intent on finding a good place to lay traps. And he was amazed because he thought or assumed that the blind man was only aware of a dark world, and yet it seemed to be very, very rich indeed. Anyway, they walked until they came to a place that they knew might be a suitable place to lay their traps. And it was beside water. And the sighted one taught the blind man how to set the trap and leave it there. And he went a little bit further away and set his own trap. But this time he made sure he disguised the trap so that the birds wouldn't see it. And he was in such a hurry to get home to his new wife that he didn't help the blind man to disguise his trap. And of course, he assumed, well, the blind man won't know any better. Anyway, they went home that evening. And the next day, they headed back into the forest. The blind man, being aware of the familiar places, and when they went in deeper to the forest, he held on to his brother-in-law, held on to his hand as they arrived at the place where They had laid their traps. And the blind man says, "Oh, I can hear birds. I can hear birds. Are there birds in the traps?" And the sighted man said, "Oh, yes, indeed, they are." And he went first to his own one that was disguised. And in the trap was a little brown bird that he took out and he put it into his hunting bag. He said, "Yes, I've caught one. Now let's look at your trap." And they went over to where the blind man had put his trap. And the sighted man said, "Oh, there's a bird in your trap too." But as he spoke, he could feel some jealousy rising up, because in the blind man's trap was a beautifully colored bird, all the colors of the rainbow. And he thought, those feathers would make a very nice hat for my wife. But the blind man, he had a wife too, and she'd probably want those nice feathers. So what he did was he took the colored bird out of the blind man's trap and he placed it in his hunting bag, and he took his brown bird out, gave it to the blind man and said, "Here is your bird." And the blind man took the bird. But he felt it. He could rub along its feathers. He could feel its size, its shape, its little beating heart. He said nothing, but he put it in his bag. And then it was time to go home, and they headed back through the forest without saying anything. And then they took a rest under an oak tree. And as they sat there, well, they talked about many things. I mean, the young man, the sighted man, was impressed with the knowledge and the wisdom of his blind brother-in-law. A man who knew so much and yet could not see. And the young man asked him a question that had bothered him for a long, long time. And he said, "Tell me, why do you think people fight?" And the blind man said nothing for a few moments as he pondered the question. Then he raised his head, facing the sighted man. He said, well, looking at him directly, as if he could see right in to his very soul. He said, "People fight because they do to each other what you have just done to me." And the words, well, they shocked the sighted man. How could he have known? And he felt so ashamed. He tried to think of a response, but none came. What can you answer to something like that? Well, rising to his feet, he went over to his hunting bag and he took out the colourful bird. And he gave it to the blind man. "Actually, this is your bird. It is rightfully yours." And the blind man took the bird and he ran his hands along the feathers, and he could feel its wings and its size and its little beating heart. And he said, "Thank you. Do you have any other questions for me?" he asked the sighted one. "Yes," he says, "I do. How do people become friends after they have fought?" And the blind man smiled and he said, "They do so by doing just what you have done to me. That is how people become friends again." Sinead. And there's a Chinese proverb that says, "Although he hates me, if I do not hate him, enmity will soon be at an end." So Have we come to the end, John?
Well, yes, and I didn't. It was pure coincidence that I came in at this moment. Let's watch it in retrospect. There was a certain amount of traffic from that last piece of hedge where you saw me, and I crawled out of. I'm now on now in four walls, right, rather than a cold van, which is much more conducive to good health. But I can see by everybody's smiles it's been a magnificent session. I will catch up on it. Thank you so much for coming. Do come back to us sometime, won't you?
Me, absolutely. My apology, I've been feeling so bad about not being here. So when you put the call out, I said, absolutely, this was one Friday that I was free for this hour. So yes.
So we've actually got a couple of very Irish Fridays we've had them here tonight. And then next Friday is Stories for Children is from Maria Gillan.
Ah, lovely, lovely.
Which, who I failed to, because I didn't have the right diary with me when I was traveling, realised that I promised her an entirely different week, but it was all good. so thank you, Sarah, for being my co-host. There you go, letting the world in. One day you'll be somewhere and I won't call on you to do anything, but that might be a long time in the future. Nice to see you back, David. Nice to see you, Despina. And so what have we got? We've got Tuesday. We've got our young international tellers, always a bit hit and miss at the moment because people are doing school trips and exams and other more terrifying things. So we don't know. It's all a bit random who we get on at the moment. We might get one, we might get three, we might get four, we might get none. But it's worth just tuning in because if they are there, it's lovely to support them. So that's 5 o'clock UK, Irish and Moroccan time, probably something like midday in Ohio. I don't know what it is in Greece, probably 2 hours later, probably like 7 o'clock. I'm getting a really good world clock in my head, and I don't know where it is where Janet is. I mean, it's probably a different planet altogether.
Oh no.
So, and David, and so right now, thank you, Waleed, for flying the magic carpet. And next Friday, Maria Gillan. Tuesday, Young International Tellers. Meanwhile, a final round of applause for Eimear Burke.
I don't like I got Despina to tell a story too, so I want to say thank you, Despina.
Oh, you got Despina to tell a story. So did I missed a really good night, didn't I? I'm going to have to go catch up. Right. Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Iwa, Sloan.
Bye.
And